Good morning. I'd like to call the House Education Committee to order. Today is Monday, April 24th, 2023. Let the record reflect that it's 08 o'clock. Today we have present Representative Hemschoot, Representative McKay, Representative McCormick, and myself, Representative Allard, and Representative Prox. I would like to remind the committee members and those in the audience to silence and turn off your cell phones. We also have present Representative Ruffridge. The staff that will be assisting us today are Linda with the House Records. Thank you, Linda, for being here. And Sydney with the LIO. Lindsay is with our House Education Committee aide. We have 3 items on today's agenda. The committee will be closing public testimony for HB 105, Governor Parental Rights Bill. We will be opening and closing public testimony for HB 106, Teacher Recruitment Lump Sum Payment. And we'll be hearing the first presentation along with taking public testimony on HB 11, Education for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. As you can tell, we have a full agenda, so we'll get right to it. Up first is HB 105. I will now be closing public testimony for HB 105, Parental Rights Bill. Are there any questions or comments from the committee members? Go ahead, Representative Ruffridge.
Thank you, Chair Allard. I just wanted to be clear on what is happening for HB 105. I think there is a lot of folks calling into the LIO currently, as well as calling into at least my office, I know that, wishing to testify on House Bill 105. So potentially there was some confusion about what was happening with that. So I'm not sure what else to do except for to explain that you were closing public testimony this morning. So hopefully folks are understanding of that, and we can move on.
So in reference, thank you, Representative Ruffridge, I was going to speak on that. So in reference to HB 105, the clerk had us put it on there as a previously heard bill, in which we did, and they also listed it as public testimony for the other 2 bills, and it was just on there as well. We will be setting the bill aside until Wednesday, 4/26/23, so April the 26th, Wednesday. The second item up on today's agenda is public testimony for HB 106. We will open up public testimony on HB 106. Brief at ease. House Education Committee is being called back to order. Is there anyone in the room wishing to testify on House Bill 106? Is there anyone on the line wishing to testify on House Bill 106? I will now leave public testimony open for House Bill 106. Are there any further questions from committee members? Seeing none, we will have set House Bill 106 aside for Wednesday to continue on with public testimony. That is April 26, 2023. The final item on today's agenda is the first item of hearing of HB 111. Today, the committee will adopt the CS version of HB 111, hear from the bill sponsor along with invited testimony, open and closed public testimony, then the bill will be set aside. In order to get HB 111 in front of the committee today, a committee substitute has been created. What is the will of the body? Representative Ruffridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to adopt the committee substitute for House Bill number 111, version Sierra, also referred to as 32-LS0504/S.
Are there any objections? Hearing and seeing none objections, House Bill 111, version S will be adopted. Are there any questions from the committee? House Bill 111, version S will be adopted. I would like to invite my aide, Lindsay Causer. Brief at ease. Okay, thank you. We're going to call the House Education Committee back to order. Looks like we have somebody online to testify on House Bill 106. The person is Ed Martin. Mr. Martin, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Allard, and members of the committee. I am opposed to this bill, and I'll tell you why. First off, money should be spent with regards to our college. We don't have an accredited education course in this state. That may be some of the problems that you're having with filling education positions. I'd rather see this money go toward that in the light of, maybe not being able to have enough people educated to educate our children. I think this thing was probably lobbied by the teachers union through the governor's office. I don't know that for a fact, but it sure, it looks like and sounds like it's probably a duck. I'm just appalled by the spending that you people are doing in the Capitol. There's nothing there to take care of other issues that are vitally important. And the failure of taking up issues with regards to our court system, with regards to our statutes, particularly public official bonds, and you know what I'm talking about, my representative. You have promised to call me last week. You failed to do it. You weren't available over the weekend, and I really want to know what's going on.
Mr. Martin, we're not here to make any comments to sitting legislators. Please just stick to the bill and your testimony, please.
Well, if people were accountable, I wouldn't have to go that direction. But I can tell you, this bill should die in your committee, and that money should go toward where we can educate for the teachers we need in the bush communities. Or come up with a tax for those in those bush communities, between the fact that we pay taxes in an organized borough and they out there pay nothing. This insanity has to stop, folks. Come on, honor your oaths. That's what I have to say today. And thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Is there anybody else available for public testimony on HB 106? Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members? I'm going to leave public testimony open until next Wednesday for HB 106. I have been informed that many teachers do want to call in. It's just when we have it, it's 8 o'clock in the morning and they're teaching their classes. So it's going to be a little tough. No question. Yep, Representative Ruffridge, please.
Just a question, Ms. Chair. So by leaving public testimony open, are we going to take public testimony on Wednesday of next week, or are we just leaving it open so that emails can come in until that time?
I haven't decided on that. I do know right now anybody who wants to write an email can do that at house.education@aklake.gov.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other further questions on HB 106? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set that bill aside. Brief at ease. Thank you, and sorry for the delays. We call House Education Committee back to order. We're trying to locate Deed. We have some representatives who have questions, and if they could come back down here, we can't reach them on the phone. They're probably in between walking from the Capitol to their offices. So we're requesting Deed be present for this on HB 111. Okay, so right now we have Lindsay Causer is going to go ahead and present House Bill 111 for the deaf and hard of hearing Children Bill of Rights. And we have invited testimony as well. We have Donald Koch. Is he with? No, okay. And then we have Heather, nope, those are testimony, and Andrea Samuel. And do we have, is Richard Saville is with the Department of Health, and they will be testifying on it. Okay. Thank you. And it could have been a demote. Lindsay Causer, can you go ahead and do the presentation, please? Thank you.
Good morning, House Education. My name is Lindsay Causer. For the record, I am staff to Representative Allard. Before we begin our presentation, I would like to have one of our invited testimonies go ahead and give her testimony. Her name is Andrea Samuel. She's a parent, and she has been pivotal in helping us get this bill together, and she has to take her kids to school. So I would like to just give her the opportunity before she has to leave, if Andrea is on the phone.
Ms. Causer, could you please do the presentation first, and then we can follow up with Ms. Samuel.
Sure. Okay. So this is HB 111, Deaf and Hard of Hearing. It's the Children's Bill of Rights. So I'm going to go over a brief presentation. The first question is, who does this bill actually affect? Well, there's 149 deaf or hard of hearing children in the state of Alaska. And in your presentation, you see the breakdown. The majority of the students are in Anchorage because of the School of the Deaf that is there. And then they're spread out throughout our state. So what services are currently being offered to these students? Well, the services that are being offered are different based on the school district and what available resources they have. This bill would help bring together all of them, and it would help them also get a more fair distribute information and resources. Right now, there's nothing that says that the school districts have to provide the information and resources that are available to the students. And so this would ensure that each school district is providing the same resources and making sure that each student knows what's available, the tools that are at hand, the parents know, so that they're able to make the best decision for their children. There is currently a School of the Deaf in the admin code, but it's not in statute. And so this bill would take that School of the Deaf and put it in statute. This would basically strengthen the importance of the school, and it could possibly protect it down the road. Mr. Seville will go more into detail on these services and a little bit more about what's already being offered. So what does this bill do? This bill does 6 basic things. It says that the school district shall provide a parent of a child who is deaf or hard of hearing a comprehensive, neutral, and unbiased information on hearing technologies, methods of communication, services and programs, and support and advocacy services offered by the public and private agencies. The second thing it does, it allows parents of the child who are deaf or hard of hearing to choose the method of communication that the parent determines is the most appropriate. And then number 3, it requires the school district to provide services using the parent's chosen method of communication for their child. 4th, the school district shall deliver services to a child who is deaf or hard of hearing through professional with training, experience, and background in chosen methods of communication, and shall inform a parent of a child who is deaf or hard of hearing of the school district's duties and their rights as parents. 5, it defines terms, bilingual approach, cued speech, deaf, hard of hearing, listening and spoken language, and total communication. And 6, it codifies the existence of centralized School of the Deaf, moving it from admin code to statute for those that is determined placement at the program is appropriate for a child who resides in the district. So this is not forcing every child who's deaf or hard of hearing in the state to go to the school in Anchorage. What it's doing is it's providing the services for those who want to stay with their family and want to be taught in the schools that they're already in. It's just providing them the tools that they need in order to be successful in their environments. And so now we can go to public testimony.
No, could you please go ahead and go through the sectional analysis and then the
Sure.
fiscal note following?
Sure. So this is, this slide is basically the sectional analysis. It's just broken down. So would you like me to review it again?
I think that on the sectional analysis, we have definitions and other input. If you can go ahead and read the sectional analysis, that would be great.
Okay. So section 1 amends AS 1430-272 by adding new subsections. A school district must provide a parent with comprehensive information regarding hearing technologies, different methods of communication, services and programs designed to help children who are deaf and hard of hearing, information on support and advocacy services offered by public and private agencies. Number 2, parents choose the method of communication that will be most appropriate for their child. Number 3, services are delivered to the children through professionals with training, experience, and background in a chosen method of communication. School districts must inform a parent of school district's duties and the parent's rights under Section C. And in Section E, it defines the following words: bilingual approach, cued speech, deaf, hard of hearing, listening, and spoken language, and total communication. And Section 2 amends AS 1430-276 by adding a new subsection that requires a department to establish and operate a centralized program for students whose primary language is ASL in the least restrictive environment for those students, provide residential services as a part of the program, establishes that a school district may operate the program under specific requirements, and provide funding for the students who attend the program, operate a school district under the subsection to that school. And then the fiscal note that's attached, it shows a one-time fee of $6,000, and it's for legal fees to implement the necessary regulation changes.
Thank you. Okay, you have invited testimony, so let's go on to them. Could we just do a quick brief at ease, please?
Sure.
Brief at ease. House Education been called to order? Okay, so we're going to have first up is Andrea Samuel. Andrea, are you with us, please? And if you could put your name
good
on the
morning.
record, your affiliation,
Yes.
and then begin your testimony, please.
Yes, good morning, Representatives. My name is Andrea Samuel. I am an Anchorage resident and a mother of 2 school-age children. My second child uses cochlear implants to listen and talk. She was born with a recessive genetic deafness, and thanks to the universal newborn hearing screen, her hearing status was detected in her first few weeks of life. As irony would have it, I had been a practicing speech and language pathologist for 10 years at the time of my daughter's birth in 2011. My job was to help individuals with communication disorders develop or regain their ability to access language. But despite all the tools I had learned to help the various populations I worked with, habilitating and educating a deaf or hard of hearing child was not one of them. The few people I had met in my life who were deaf either used sign language or were oral, but relied heavily on lip reading. My first reaction to my daughter's diagnosis was shock and denial. No one in my or my husband's family was deaf or hard of hearing, and I remember the day that both my husband and I looked at each other and realized that life was going to be different raising child number 2. Language access was not a given for her. we needed to decide if we wanted to provide her access to sound in a rich spoken language environment, or if we wanted to raise her to learn a visual language in a rich visual language environment. But the latter was a language we did not know. Conflicted by national and local experts espousing a visual language approach as best practice, I delved into the latest research and came up with guarded optimism that we could raise our daughter in our native spoken language. The hearing technology in 2011 had become highly sophisticated at delivering high-fidelity sound to the young developing brain. With early access through digital hearing aids and a lot of attention paid to her daily listening experiences, she ended up babbling at 8 months and uttering her first words at 14 months and talking in full sentences by age 3. She was off to preschool at age 3 and participated in the auditory oral program in the Anchorage School District so she could strengthen her listening skills to learn in a mainstream neighborhood classroom. In first grade, her hearing levels dropped further, and we pursued a cochlear implant on her left side, and then 2 years later, her right side. We pursued auditory verbal therapy at various points in her early years. This is a specialized therapy designed to stimulate and enrich a child's auditory brain development, which in turn allows the child to develop spoken language and listening skills. My daughter is now 12 and thriving as a deaf individual who is no longer on an IEP. She uses listening and spoken language to access her English language-based education. She is highly literate, a great self-advocate, and has lots of friends. So that's my backstory, and these are the facts that I really want to impart to everybody. Greater than 90% of children who are born deaf or hard of hearing are born to hearing parents like us, with no familial history of hearing loss, with no proficiency in sign language. When given outcomes data, many will choose an auditory oral approach like we did, so that their child can learn to listen and talk. They will choose this option either alone or in combination with a visual language like American Sign Language, or by supplementing listening with a visual modality to increase access to spoken language. According to the Centers for Disease Control and the NIH, 1 in 3 in 1,000 babies are born with hearing loss, but by the time the child reaches kindergarten, that number can double due to later onset hearing loss, for which sadly there is not yet a universal means of screening. This means that many children coming into the school districts may have passed their newborn hearing screen, but developed deafness later. These parents may be faced with communication decisions that look very different from the family whose child's deafness was detected at birth or in the first few months of life. These families, like all families, need unbiased counseling and ultimately need to make the final call as to what they want for their child. And moreover, they need the right professionals in place to support them. There are 2 reasons I support House Bill 111. First, this is a pro-parent choice bill, and one that prioritizes literacy outcomes regardless of communication option. It respects parent choice and full inclusion. It appreciates the student's need to communicate with peers who use the same language. Secondly, it acknowledges there being 2 recognized languages of the American public school system, English, both in its spoken and written form, and American Sign Language, which is supported by the Alaska State School for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. It also recognizes that spoken English must be made available as an option to students who are deaf or hard of hearing, and it recognizes the myriad communication methods available so that spoken and written English can be accessible in every school district. This bill, if interpreted in the spirit in which it was written, will increase the likelihood that whether a child uses American Sign Language or spoken language, he or she will become literate in English and will be able to go on and fulfill his or her potential independently. So I do support this bill, and thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you. Just a minute. You have a few questions. Go ahead, Representative Prox.
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Samuel, well, let me preface. I am not at all familiar with the process that are the events that take place if someone is born with hearing difficulties. So Did your pediatrician help you diagnose the problem? It sounded like your child was very young when this problem was addressed. Was it a pediatrician or somebody within the school district?
No, so in 2008, the EDI, Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Act, became mandated in the state of Alaska. And what that did was that allowed hospitals to have in place a hearing screener, and that all newborn children, it needed to be made available to all babies before they are discharged from hospital. So that's how we found out. And so from that, with the encouragement from our pediatrician, we took it very seriously, because I was really in denial, and we were able to get a pediatric audiologist to do a diagnostic test, and then we talked with the audiologist, and she kind of gave us this open option as to, here are the choices, and we went with the choice that we chose, listening and spoken language.
Follow up?
But I did have to go out of state to really achieve this outcome, because there really weren't the resources in place for us in 2011. But I was privileged enough to have a bit of a background in child language development, and so that was my journey. Not everybody had access to that.
Okay, follow up?
Yes, please.
Yes, you mentioned some law that was passed, I think you said 2011, EDI?
Oh, no, I believe in Alaska that came in 2008. I think that those screens were available in the hospital then. And so we have, I've actually sat on the Early Hearing Detection Advisory as a parent, and that's still up and running today. I think we were able in the state of Alaska to achieve a 98% screening rate or higher for newborns. And this is quite good, because our state has one of the highest out-of-hospital births in the country. So being able to find these babies and assess for their hearing status is pretty remarkable.
Okay, follow up?
Yes, please.
And did you have to finance this personally, or did you have insurance, or did you have some other means of paying for it? For the services
It was
that you
all
had?
of the above. Insurance was quite poor. Fortunately, at the time, I was able to meet the income requirements for Denali Kid Care just by the skin of my teeth. So that carried me for about a year. The insurance was not good. I reached out to private charities looking for financial aid. I went through quite a bit of my savings.
Mm-hmm.
I was really being very creative as to how I would, my parents are out of state. So when I went to see them, the hub that I connected, that I flew through to connect me to their, to that destination, happened to have some hubs, some centers of excellence for helping me with my child. Yes, it was definitely raising a child who's deaf and hard of hearing. There's a lot of work, regardless of which option you choose. I could have chosen sign language, and that would have been just as much work, because being able to give your baby a rich language experience is really key in success. So, big learning curve.
I follow up?
Yes, we do have other members who have questions, and I do know
that's
that
fine.
No, it's okay, that Ms. Samuels does have to take her child to school. If you can go ahead, Mr. Representative Prox, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Samuels. This, as I understand this bill, the hearing problems might not be detected until they enter the school system or want to enter the school system. And
Correct.
is that, my concern is that it's a little late at that point.
Well, it is, but this is most of the children in the state are getting their hearing status assessed at birth, and so that the parents will know, and hopefully follow up and be very much encouraged to follow up about their child's hearing loss. But as I've read to you with the incidence of hearing loss, there's also later onset hearing loss that happens during a child's early pre-linguistic phase. So that birth to 5 phase where they're developing language, and that's not caught. So basically, a newborn hearing screen pass is not a lifelong pass, and so more children are going to develop a progressive hearing loss, and it might not be detected. I'm advocating, and this would be a completely different bill, that we have a universal screening for early childhood at well child checks. But so there's more work to do. This bill isn't going to solve 100% of the problems, but what it will do is once a child's in school, they're not going to be pigeonholed into one particular communication option that the parents might not feel comfortable with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Prox. Representative Ruffridge, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Allard. Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Samuel. So, by all accounts and purposes, and thank you for sharing your story, but it sounds like your story is somewhat of a success story. And I'd like to understand more about your experience with education. Thus far, it sounds like you have to take your children to school. What is your experience like with your school district? How will this bill help that relationship? What were there barriers to your children's education that this bill will help?
Well, I'm lucky enough to live in the Anchorage School District, and we're fairly well-resourced school district compared to other districts in the state. And we have some professionals who are probably in the later parts of their career, who have a lot of expertise. What I would like to see, because I feel like we are kind of the gold standard in Alaska right now, because we are Anchorage and we're pretty well resourced, relatively speaking. More awareness among teachers and administrators in schools when there is a child with hearing loss, the supports that child needs. So I guess we had fantastic experience in the auditory oral program at the Willowa Elementary School that really got my daughter ready for being in the classroom, being in the noise of a normal classroom, and being able to learn. I think that it would be important for there to be cascade training and awareness, so that, for example, how to use the remote mic, what happens when a substitute teacher comes in, how to prepare the substitute teacher to give equal access to a child like mine. Looking at acoustics and noise level in the classroom, increasing the speech signal to the background noise ratio so the child doesn't have to struggle so hard to listen. And a lot of that can be behavior management. Some of it can be just environmental modifications. So there are lots of ways. And I'm just talking for my child and the methods that we chose, where she is relying on audition to learn and to receive information. But other children might need, and this is what's available in other parts of the country as well, they might need a note taker. They might need a sign language interpreter. They might need a cued speech alliterator. There's a whole host of things. The classroom, they might benefit from having an FM system in the classroom, or they might need a personal remote mic. There are just many options, and that's why it's important to have an educational audiologist on hand to counsel the staff. And it's also important to have a teacher of the deaf who is well-versed in the communication modes of listening and spoken language, total communication, cued speech, American Sign Language, all those modalities that are listed in this bill.
Please, thank you, Ms. Samuel. It was a comprehensive answer. And those methods are mentioned in the bill, certainly, but the bill is mentioning that the school district will be providing the parent and the child information regarding these options, but there is essentially no, I guess there's no outline for a school district to, I guess, essentially must provide some of those options. And from what it sounds like, you said that Anchorage is the gold standard, so maybe these options are already in Anchorage. What would be your opinion of, do you think that there's more, I guess, statutory, essentially mandates needed in order for school districts in the state to provide these things that you're talking about?
Yes, I do, because oftentimes what I have seen in, it has not happened with my child because I was a parent with a lot of background knowledge by the time I got to the school district. But it's very common, and it's not malicious intent, but for school districts to kick the can down the road when they're faced with a task that they're not really well resourced for. So if you're out in a more rural school district and you've got a child who has a hearing loss that perhaps wasn't detected, or they haven't been amplified correctly because of just logistics, and they need a lot of special education support. Oftentimes, and this happens in other states too, oh, well, send the kid to the deaf school. You're just going to have to send your child away. Or we're going to put your child in the life skills classroom because we don't really know, or resource room because we don't really know what to do with your child. That's just not acceptable. And I cry for those parents because they're not allowing the child to realize his or her potential. And I know very well, even in Anchorage, talking to people who work in resource rooms, because of staffing issues, labor shortages, sometimes it feels like they're just babysitting and the kid's not getting an academic education. So that's what needs to stop. And that's what's been going on. So this bill needs to correct that.
Go ahead, Representative.
Yeah, and so that really leads me to my final question is, in the current form, does this bill do what you want it to do?
This bill will provide the structure so that we will have a function, if you know what I mean. This bill will codify what we know we need, and it'll make it very clear to school districts that we need to present all the options. Even if you don't have them right now, you need to present them. And then we need to mobilize and get them to the parent and the child so the child can have a successful academic experience and a social one too. They go hand in hand. So, I think that this bill is start putting a desperately needed foundation in to where we want to go in deaf education in the state of Alaska for helping deaf and hard of hearing students.
Representative Ruffridge, I do know that Ms. Causer has answers for you, but I'm going to because I know that Ms. Samuel has to go to take her child to school, I'm going to are you finished, or do you need to do a follow? Okay. Representative Story has
I
a
have
question.
about 10 more minutes. I
Okay.
can devote 10 more
Representative
minutes
Story
to
has a
this.
question for you, Ms. Samuel.
Yes, through the chair, thank you, Ms. Samuels, for being here and for your testimony, and particularly that you're working with the Anchorage School District right now. I don't know if you're aware, but the bill has a $6,000 fiscal note for the Department of Education. But I believe, as you're talking about, that resources are going to be needed for the school districts to provide this array of services. And I'm curious about your thoughts about that, if you feel that maybe Anchorage is resource for it, if you feel other districts in your experience are resource for it. And also, I don't know how familiar you are with CESA, the Special Education Service Agency, and I know we support CESA, and the idea being if a child is found to be deaf at birth or whatever the need is, CESA, because many of the area school districts, rural in particular, don't, and we have a shortage of audiologists in the state. It's the idea that they can provide in the different regions, fly out, assess, hook families up with services. I'm sort of saying a lot of things here right now, but if you have any insights to those, the costs and CESA, I'd appreciate it.
No, I think what I'm hearing from you is how much funding is going to be attached to this bill when there's $6,000 available, how much more. And I totally appreciate the fact that we're running in a deficit right now in the state, and that's a very important part of passing a bill right now. Again, I realize that at the moment there might not be a lot of funding to go with this bill, but you're establishing a structure. There is money that comes from IDEA, and that's supposed to serve children in special education, which most of these children are in, at least early on in their education. If they're successful, many of them move from an IEP to a 504 plan. So I think we just first need to make sure that we know, regardless of how much money the state has, that this is the right thing to do, and this needs to be in place. Then we can talk about how do we make it work. I will put in a little pitch for the Audiology and Speech Pathology Compact Bill, that perhaps passing that bill will allow greater access to audiologists out of state to come help without having to go through a lot of bureaucracy for getting licensed to practice here. That's just one possible solution in addressing the labor shortage. This will take training. I think that what we had to have a centralized consultative program that travels around the state is definitely a good option given our geographics. But I think what's important is people don't know what they don't know. And this bill will tell people what they don't know and what they need to become aware of so that they can find ways in their district to implement these supports.
Thank you. And I think Ms. Causer wanted to respond to Representative Ruffridge and to Representative Story. Please go ahead.
I would just like to point the committee's attention to page 2, lines 3 through 7, really. It shows that not only does the parent get to choose the method of communication that they determine is most appropriate for their child, but it also says that we would provide the services using the parent's chosen method of communication and deliver the services to the child who is deaf or hard of hearing, or who the school district suspects is deaf of hard of hearing through professionals with training, experience, and background. And
I'd just like to give a follow-up comment
Sure.
to add to, as the sponsor of the original bill, is that we want to provide the deaf and hard of hearing with the same opportunities that our hearing children have. That would mean that if they choose not to attend the school in Anchorage that is specialized for the deaf and hard of hearing, they can go to any public school of their choosing. We don't want to discriminate against those children who didn't ask to be deaf or hard of hearing. We want to embrace it and give them the same education as our hearing children. Go ahead, Ms. Causer.
And then the second question on the fiscal note, I believe because in the BSA, the increase for intensive students and special ed, this would fall underneath that. So these services would be a part of those, a part of that formula increase.
Representative Hemshoot.
Thank you, through the
Oh,
chair.
did you have a follow-up, Representative Story? Okay, I apologize, Representative Hemshoot.
Thank you, through the chair, Ms. Causer. On page 3, line 3. And I want to make really clear that I establish everything we can, that I support everything we can do to support deaf and hard of hearing students. But on that line, it says at the end of the line, the program must provide residential services as part of its educational program. To me, that would generate an additional fiscal note. Residential services, like we have at Mount Edgecombe, come with an expense. So has that been addressed?
I believe that it was addressed in this fiscal note, but that's something we could follow up on and get back to you if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Representative Story.
Yes, thank you. And I want to make clear, too, that I certainly support this bill, but I just think that it's, even with the special intensive funding, I think there's cost to school districts for doing this. What I was concerned about is on page, let's see, where's my notes here? On line 9 on page 3. Where it starts at the very end of the sentence 9, if a school district determines the placement at the program is appropriate, shouldn't it be if a parent determines that placement at the program is appropriate for a child? Because we want the parent, and that's what I've heard from the testimony right now, too, we want the parent to decide. Certainly, they're working with the school district, but it seems like it's appropriate that parents should be there.
What
Yeah.
line are you looking at, Rep.
I'm
Story?
looking
I
on
apologize.
page 3, line 9, the very end. There's a sentence that starts, if a school district determines that placement at the program is appropriate. Shouldn't it be if a parent determines the placement is appropriate?
That's definitely something else we could follow up with.
I do believe that that is also addressed, Representative Story, in the first part of the bill, but we have amendments that aren't due until tomorrow, so thank you very much for pointing that out to us. We will address that for sure. Are there any other comments? Ms. Samuel, do you have any last parting comments before we go on to our next invited testimony?
Yeah, I would just say that, there really is funding in place through federal law. I mean, this is really not going above what the federal law already says. This is just making it specific so that, again, we don't kick the can down the road in school districts that just don't know what to do with kids who are deaf and hard of hearing. That's what needs, and send them off to a residential school. So I really hope that this bill passes. And I thank you, Representative Allard, for sponsoring this bill.
We have one last quick question from Representative Story, if you can just hold on a second.
Yes.
Thank you. Through the chair, when we talk about the school district having funding through IDEA, I would think that I would believe many children who are deaf do not receive the intensive times 13 funding, because to get that intensive criteria, you need to be able to, you have to have an aide with you all the time. There's just a intense criteria. You can't be left alone at all to qualify for that funding. So I think districts would struggle to meet the needs. And so that's why I just think more fiscal money should be with this bill, because we want to be able to meet the needs.
Ms.
Right.
Sam-
Well, I know we do have a shortage. We do have a shortage with individual aides in the district, and that has been a problem for a very, very long time. And that's a whole other issue, because that is something that, children with autism need that a lot of times, and they don't necessarily get it. So my child did not need a one-on-one aide, and many of her peers did not need that, but they needed other supports in other ways. And some supports were as much capital-based as revenue-based. So again, these environmental supports, remote mic systems, the deaf and hard of hearing specialist would check in with her maybe 3 times a week and have meetings and figure out how to reduce her listening fatigue. So this is not saying that every deaf child needs an individual aid by any means. This is, a lot of kids need individual aids and they're not getting them. This is saying, we know the resources that you want, and we're going to make sure that we either have somebody consulting frequently to help the staff, help the child. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to hire a full-time aide to be with the child.
One quick follow-up, Rep. Story.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to imply that they would have a full-time aide. I'm just saying that the funding that comes with a full-time aide is really needed to provide the equipment and all of those things. I understand that many children don't receive that.
And I understand it. Everybody's no. And if I will, my last parting comment would be: these kids are like bonds. Okay, an early investment is really going to make a difference. We can see. I bet you, if you were to go to downtown Anchorage and see some of these homeless people, a lot of them probably had an undetected hearing loss. The unemployment rates for kids who did not get the proper education they needed, we're paying for them, okay? This is a really important bill. So I know there's funding, but these kids have a lot of potential. It's just giving them the access they need to learn. And that's what this bill is able to do.
Thank you, Ms. Samuel, for your testimony today. I just wanted to state that I worked hand in hand with Ms. Samuel and her expertise on this bill. She was an intricate, major part of this bill coming forward. I also want to say there is no cost too much to establish education for our children, especially those with special needs. And I'm going to say this, I am offended, and I'm trying to not be with some of the comments coming out as if children who are hard of hearing or deaf are any less important than our hearing children. It is deafness. It is hard of hearing. That's all. They deserve the same education that all our children deserve. Next is Richard Saville. Mr. Saville is with Department of Health. And if you could please put on testimony who you're with, who you represent, what council you are on, and move forward with your testimony, please.
Thank you, Representative Allard. Apologize, let me mute my computer here.
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Richard Saville. I am staff person for the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education. And in that role, I am the lead staff person for the education pieces of the council. So I work with the Interagency Coordinating Council for Toddlers with Disabilities. I work with the Special Education Advisory Panel, and I work with the Special Education Services Agency. I also am the vice chair for the Deaf Education Board, and I'm testifying today through those roles on behalf of the deaf and hard of hearing community as an ally. I'd like to thank Representative Allard for taking this legislation forward. It first came to us at the Governor's Council last fall through the deaf and hard of hearing community, and after having had discussions with them and doing some research, we decided, as the Governor's Council decided, to take this up as one of our legislative priorities for the year. So we were able to bring this bill to Representative Allard, or this idea for this bill, and we do appreciate the support as well as the others that have signed on. So according to the National Association of the Deaf, 17 other states have passed similar legislation known as a Deaf Children's Bill of Rights. And there are a number of reasons, as laid out in the presentation by Ms. Causer, to pass this bill. I'd like to touch on a few of them. And the big idea for this bill, I believe, is it does come down to parent and family choice for how their children will acquire and develop language and be educated, and therefore be able to live in rich language environments and fulfill their potential. And so this bill will ensure that all families of deaf and hard of hearing children especially those of hard of hearing who may not necessarily receive all the information up front as someone who may be deaf, will understand all the resources available to them, the different routes for language acquisition, and be given those options so that they can fully make a fully informed decision as to what's best for their children and their families going forward. I think that there has been a tendency for, as I said, for hard of hearing children or those children who do have some hearing to be put right into a spoken English classroom. And that can tend to lead towards language deficits because they can't hear as well, which also would lead to their education falling behind, again, because they don't have the language skills developed and they can't hear what's going on. So having families be able to make those choices up front or as soon as they are aware is very important. I think there also is, that hasn't necessarily, it's been touched on a little bit, but maybe not so specifically. There's an aspirational aspect to this bill in that we will treat in the state of Alaska children who are deaf or hard of hearing as equals and get them the support that they need to fulfill their full potential. And I think the third point I'd like to touch on, it was mentioned in Ms. Causer's presentation, the Alaska State School for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is in administrative code, and the statutory authority for that code, to paraphrase, is 1407-030, would consider the school a special school. And to paraphrase, that statute says that the Department of Education and Early Development may establish such a school. This bill would codify the existence of that school and protect it in the future. And I say that with no inclination from anywhere that the Department of Early Education, Early Development has any thoughts of not continuing the school, but you never know down the road, funding and those kinds of things happen. So I think that continuing this under a statutory authority where they shall provide this program is important to protect the deaf and hard of hearing children in the state. Listening to the previous testimony is very moving, and she certainly has more personal experience in this area than I do. And so I want to thank her for that testimony, just listening to her. But some of the questions that came up, I think I can maybe address some of the questions that representatives had before I take questions of my own. The school in Anchorage is the statewide school for deaf and hard of hearing is through the Anchorage School District. It's funded through the Anchorage School District and then partially from the Department of Education and Early Development. And the housing aspect of that school happens through a state grant, which is provided or administered through the Rural Deaf Student Supports Program through Hope Community Resources. And so the housing happens in matched host families versus a dormitory type setting. And so those kids that come from rural Alaska, if that's the choice of the families, they are matched with families who will meet those children's needs, are fluent in ASL. And that's how the housing for that happens. I believe Representative Story had a question or a comment about Special Education Services Agency. And I do work with CESA as well. And they are definitely and currently do provide services and resources and education to districts, rural districts across the state, and listening and spoken language, ASL. They have a deaf-blind program. And so they are available to provide training and resources to those districts, but they are not set up to provide those services to the children on an ongoing basis. So they go in and provide training and resources, and then hopefully the teachers in those districts pick that up and are able to move forward with that. And then I would also just say that the School for the Deaf in Anchorage is able to provide some services to rural districts through memorandums of agreement with rural districts if that's something that those districts are willing or would like to take on. And I know that they do have some MOAs set up for that currently. I think that is what I have. Do you have questions?
Thank you. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Seville? Representative Prox.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Seville. Through the chair, there are some services provided now through the Anchorage School District, and I guess I'm trying to get an understanding of how that is working and maybe isn't working. But there is funding provided for the Anchorage School District to run a program that is at least meeting some need, but how much need is not being met? Do we have any idea of the gap in services, if you will, on a statewide basis?
Through the chair, Representative Prox, thank you. I do not have an answer for that question right now. I can say that the School for the Deaf is operated through the Anchorage School District and is funded mostly through ASD funds with some supplementals from Department of Education and Early Development. So it's not a solely Anchorage School District funded program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Story has a question for you.
Yes, thank you through the chair. And I certainly, if I have offended anyone with my questioning, I don't mean to say these children in any mean don't require everything that we all want our children to have. So I'm sorry about that if I've given that thought with my question about funding. My question about funding just simply has to be with, are we providing enough funding? And if these things in this bill are so worthy, but I think it's like if we pass a bill, but we don't fund the means to make these things actually happen for our students, then that's not the intention that we have, because we want to be resourcing it. So my intention for these questions is just simply to say, do we need to have a larger fiscal note to, be hiring audiologists for the state, to sharing with CISA, just the means to get these services to the children and their families that they pick. So thank you for allowing me to clarify that. And so kind of my follow-up Mr. Seville, thank you, is what Rep. Prox was just asking right now about the gaps in services. And that would be really helpful to me, and I think this committee, if we sort of had an idea with what would be needed with the number of students we have and with the services we're currently offering, what the need may be. And you don't need to answer that right now, but if anyone had any sort of response to that, I would surely appreciate knowing that.
Mr. Seville, did you want to take an attempt to answer that question? I also have Department of Education on the line as well, as far as the funding.
Thank you, Representative Allard. The only attempt I would take to answer that would be that I know that as everywhere, there are staffing shortages, and so we definitely are lacking in professionals across the state able to do a number of different jobs with respect to this community. And so anything we can do to promote people moving up here to take those jobs, or education through our university system, or whatever it may be to help meet these needs, that would be excellent. As far as being able to put specific numbers on, how many kids are being missed or whatever else may be involved in the question as far as unmet needs, I'm not comfortable answering that right now, but I can try to do some research and get back to you.
Thank you. And I also wanted to make the comment is I don't think Alaskans realize how many children we do have. There's 149 in our state. And I don't think Alaskans realize how many people do know ASL. My staffer knows ASL. In fact, when we were on the Anchorage Assembly, I would know what the ASL interpreters were saying, and they would, some of them would skew what I was saying versus what others individuals were saying. But she absolutely came in handy in giving us that information. She's not licensed, she's not certified, and this bill will allow, if a mom wanted to go in and interpret in the child's classroom, they could do that. Representative Ruffridge, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ellard. Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Seville, for being here today. So I had some of the same questions as the other representatives that spoke before me, specifically in regards to, I guess, what is happening currently. So I spent some time this weekend reading through our guidance for special education personnel. Fascinating reading. We have a whole section in here on teachers of students who are visually impaired or deaf, about a person who has the primary responsibility for planning educational programs for persons who are visually impaired or deaf, must have an endorsement in the education of children with relevant impairment. Districts struggling to locate teachers who meet this requirement should contact the Special Education Service Agency, which we've already referenced today, which is CSAW. So it seems like, based off of this language, potentially we already have an issue with finding individuals to meet some of the requirements that we have in regulation. Is there a concern when we have on page 2, line 7 of the bill, that there is, delivering services to a child who is deaf or hard of hearing, or who the school district may suspect be deaf or hard of hearing? This is going to codify something that we currently have in regulation that it sounds like maybe we're already not meeting the requirement of. What is your assessment of that? How are we doing as a state for these 149 individuals and then take into context the fact that, the line right before what's going to be added in section 2, letter B, reads that, paraphrasing again, school districts need to ensure to the maximum extent appropriate that children with disabilities be educated with children who are not children with disabilities. How do we blend those things together and then, ensure that we have these services available for these 149 people, and are we doing that right now?
Thank you, Representative Ruffridge, through the chair. I don't believe the language in Section 2 is any different as far as, to your paraphrasing, providing students with disabilities and education in an environment along with students without disabilities is any different than has been required by the IDEA for 30 years now or so. I think if the state is failing in that regard, we have work to do regardless of what this bill says. I think that through the School of the Deaf in Anchorage, the services are being. Could you repeat your questions, Representative Ruffridge? My apologies. I took notes, but now I'm not not quite following them. So
I talked a lot before I asked the question. So I guess for me, just off the top of my head, just having a school for deaf or hard of hearing by nature seems like we aren't providing education with students without disability. We have a school for a very specific group of people. I think what this bill is asking us to do is to say, maybe the best thing in the world is not to have children essentially be forced to go to or have to go to a special school for deaf or hard of hearing, but to be able to be educated in the place where they live. And it sounds like, based off of the guidance for special education personnel, maybe we don't have the right number of people, because it says right here, districts struggling to locate teachers to meet this requirement. We put it in regulation that we may struggle to meet the requirement to have these individuals available. Where are we at as a state right now as far as providing services to the 149 students we have who are deaf or hard of hearing? And do you think having a special school for deaf or hard of hearing children, falls outside of what we already asked to do, which is to essentially educate kids in the environment in which they live?
thank you for that clarification, sir. I believe that having the school is a good thing because it allows families to make the choice for what's best for their children. If families of children who are deaf or hard of hearing feel that the best environment for them to learn in, and quite possibly the least restrictive environment for them to learn in, is a school where ASL is taught and spoken, and they can grow in that environment, that language-rich environment, then that's the appropriate placement for them if that's what the parents choose. I also think that families should have the opportunity to say no thank you to that, and to have their students learn in their rural schools or wherever it may be, and have their children thrive in the language-rich environment in that school. And so I think it's the state's responsibility to provide that environment in the least restrictive environment in their hometowns as necessary, but also providing the option if they want to be in a school surrounded by people who are speaking ASL because that's what the families think is most important for them, then I think that's appropriate.
Follow up?
Yeah, just a follow-up to that is, so my real question is how are we doing as a state currently? So we have, I see 3 students in Annette Island who are either deaf or hard of hearing. How are we doing for those 3 students? Do we have what's in our current guidance for special education personnel? Do we have a person with a primary responsibility and an endorsement in the education of those children?
Within that school district?
Just for
Is
example.
that the question?
Yes.
Just in general? I do not know Representative Ruffridge, but I can look into that specifically for you.
Thank you.
Representative, are you done?
Yes.
You have it? Okay. Representative McKay?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just real quick, I assume ASL stands for American Sign Language. I'm not familiar with, I was pretty sure about the sign language part, but I didn't know if, okay. And then the second question is, do the 149 kids that are listed, do they fall under the intensive needs portion of the Education Foundation formula fully or partially or not at all? I guess I'm trying to figure out how are they outside of the formula? Are they inside it? Or can you explain that in fairly simple terms? Someone?
Mr. Seville, did you want to answer that question?
Thank you, Representative Allard, through the chair, Representative McKay. To clarify ASL, it is American Sign Language. My apologies for not saying that up front. And to the second question, as far as how these 149 children fall into the intensive needs portion or formula, I'm not aware of that, but that may be something that the Department of Education may be able to answer.
Thank you, and we'll go there. I just wanted to make a quick comment, is that do you believe, or a question to Mr. Seville, do you believe that because we're taking it from a regulation or a admin code, moving it into state law could then further encourage the schools to be more willing or have to give that education to the children that are deaf or hard of hearing versus, we don't have to, versus, okay, we need to implement this?
Thank you, Representative Allard. I do believe when things are in statute, they carry more weight. I can't speak for whether or not districts would take it more seriously or not, or whether or not they would be able to find the staffing to meet those needs. But I think that having it in statute would codify the need for these services on a level that does not happen when it's in regulation. And so, yes, I do. We do definitely support this bill and moving things into statute.
Thank you. And before I go on to Representative Hemshoot, if Mr. Donald Enoch, if you're from Department of Education, could you further answer Mr. McKay's question, please? And Representative McKay may have to repeat it.
Hello, this is Donald Enoch with the Department of Education, for the record. I'm the State Administrator for Special Education. And could we please restate the question? I believe it was on 149 kids and whether they qualify for intensive need funding.
Yeah, I think it's pretty basic for us to understand if the 149 kids are included under the intensive needs portion of the Education Foundation formula? Yes, no, partially? Just wondering
Yeah,
if
the
we're,
district
how they get their
responsibility-
funding and how the money part of this works. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, Senator McKay. This is a district responsibility to submit whether they want the child's IEP to be reviewed for intensive funding. I can tell you that students that have deaf or hard of hearing or are blind that require specialized Braille instruction or specialized American Sign Language instruction, those are exemptions from the 7 criteria that most intensive needs students, including whether those students would need a full-time aide, that's waived. If it's necessary for the child, obviously that has to be in place. But if it's not necessary, they still qualify for the intensive funding under the category of deafness.
That helped a lot with, that was huge input, because I feel that helped a lot with our funding questions. Is that, Representative Story, do you have a question on that, or that really helped me out? Okay. And I wanted to reiterate that when we read section 2 of page 3, you have to read lines 1 through 14. Taking it out of context would actually distort the actual purpose of section 2. It's kind of like when the press quotes you, they take it out of context. It doesn't make any sense. So that whole regulation needs to be put together. So Representative Hemshoot, go ahead with your question, please. And then after you, we're going to move on to public testimony.
Thank you, Chair Allard. I was wondering if I could have the latitude
Absolutely.
just to make a comment.
Of course.
We have a deaf student in Sitka, and he's been with us since before he started school. And the Sitka District invests in 2 interpreters because that's what it takes to get him through his day. And so it helps to know how some of that funding comes about, but I'm guessing that even a times 13 multiplier may not cover 2 full individuals. But in the districts where I've done reviews, the IEP carries a lot of weight and people are responsive to the IEP, but that doesn't mean there's not more we need to do.
That's true. Thank you, Representative Henshoot. Are there any more questions or comments? We have Mr. Prox, Representative Prox, I apologize.
Yes, thank you. Mr.
Enoch, Department of Education.
Well, either one.
Okay.
Whomever is available, I guess, Mr. Seville or Mr. Enoch. We heard from the first testifier, and I'm sorry I don't have her name written down in the place where I can recover it, that she essentially discovered the hearing problem with her child well before the child would get involved with the education system. And so and apparently there's other federal programs and et cetera that I wasn't aware of for funding. But my concern is that by focusing in the school district, we're going to be missing a lot of children. And should this be taken care of maybe through the Department of Health to follow up on the baby checkups and whatnot and discover these problems earlier? Would there be it sounds like there would be an advantage to that, and would we be better off focusing on that area first?
Oh, you're muted, Mr. Seville. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, sorry about that.
Oh, there
Thank
you go. We can hear you now.
Through the chair, Representative Prox, thank you for that question. I do agree that there would be children missed between the newborn hearing screening and a screening that may take place when they become preschool, kindergarten age children. And if there is something that we would like to look at legislatively to help not miss those children, that would be fantastic. I do think that including it in this bill can only do good things, regardless of what happens between the newborn and when it gets to the school districts. And we have an opportunity to pass this now, which would help catch children, even if does seem later than you want to catch them. You're still catching them, and it's never too late while we work on something for the in-between years.
Follow up?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick comment. I want to give a personal situation, and then I do know that we already have it in place that babies are to be tested. But I will tell you, she'll probably kill me for saying this. My daughter had a hearing problem. She was hard of hearing. Mom and dad thought it was just her learning how to speak, meaning me, learning that our daughter was learning how to speak. All the nurses, the doctors, her baby well appointments all missed it. When my daughter was in kindergarten, she was struggling with being able to read and pronounce her words, or pronounce her words, and then the school nurse caught it. And because of that, my daughter's hearing didn't get worse. She was able to go in for a surgery. She got tubes, and her hearing is better. But I have no doubt in my mind that there are kids who are struggling still that are deaf and hard of hearing, or hard of hearing and don't realize it. If I personally don't have my hearing aids in, I can't hear you. And sometimes people misinterpret that as me being rude, ignoring them. I have a very hard time pronouncing my words still. I can't put them together. It's a lifelong issue that I have to continue. So it is a really great thing that we do address as early as possible, but I do know that the babies are tested prior. But I'd hate to see a child go into school with a hard of hearing or even borderline deaf and not be able to continue their education. Representative Himshoot?
Thank you. Through the chair, my question's for Mr. Enoch. Mr. Enoch, can you describe Child Find? Is that something that the department works with, or it seems like we have some programs in place to find kids and then to work with them early through the public schools, but I could be mistaken about that. Can you fill us in? Is Mr. Enoch not with us?
He's on.
Okay.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I had my phone muted. Through the chair, Representative Himshoot, Child Find is a federal requirement that all school districts must participate in. Some districts do it different than other districts. For example, larger districts like, for example, Mat-Su School District does this on a monthly basis, where smaller school districts do it on an as-needed basis, but at least once a year they have to have an organized effort to meet federal requirements.
Do you have a follow-up? We have a follow-up, please.
Yeah, thank you. Follow up through the chair. Mr. Enoch, can you tell us more about Child Find? What ages and what does it trigger? So if a child were found to be hard of hearing or deaf, would that show up in a Child Find screening? And what ages are we talking about?
Through the chair, Representative Himshoot, the ages we're talking about for special education services are 3 to 5 year olds typically. The department also takes full responsibility in special education for students that are up to age 22. But Child Find is primarily focused on 3 to 5 year olds to ensure that every student coming into the school district has any potential disabilities or problems that might be remediated through education taken care of at that time.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up? Representative Himshoot? No? Representative Ruffridge and then Representative Prox.
Thank you, Chair Allard. Through the chair, Mr. Enoch. So you had given us a description of IEP and intensive needs funding, but I did just have a follow-up question to that. So for an IEP to qualify for special needs or for intensive needs funding, a child would need to require full-time services of an interpreter, is how I understand it currently. And we heard from our previous testifier, Ms. Samuel, there's a lot of technology available to allow children who might be deaf or hard of hearing to have their education given in multiple language formats and may not require an interpreter all the time. Is there a concern that individuals who don't need essentially one-on-one time but still qualify as deaf or hard of hearing would not qualify for intensive needs funding?
Through the chair, Senator Praxis, when we're doing the intensive review files, a student who requires an interpreter at any point during the day and it absolutely must be provided would qualify for intensive funding. If the student, for example, were a sign language student and the interpreter didn't need to be there for lunch, I would not agree with that personally, but if that were something written into the IEP, that student would still qualify for intensive services.
Please, so I just want to be absolutely clear that even if you require an interpreter, let's say for 1 day out of the week, you would qualify for the intensive needs funding, because that seems to be the opposite of what's in the manual for determining eligibility.
Through the chair, Senator Prax.
It's Representative Ruffridge. I'm just going to correct that on the record.
Terribly sorry.
Did you hear him? Can you please repeat that?
Through the chair, Representative Rutledge. The intensive funding reviews provide a foundation for how we review the files. I can tell you that in the 16 years I've been doing intensive reviews, it's gone through quite a few changes, including the regulatory changes. But in all of those circumstances, a student who requires an interpreter at least once a day would be less than once a day would be very rare. It would be very rare that a student would not require an interpreter for every school day. I don't think I've ever seen an IEP come through like that. If I did, and we disapproved that, we would contact the district and then make it known to them that there is a waiver process that's available to them. And frankly, a waiver for a student who requires a sign language interpreter at least once a week would be rare, but definitely the waiver would be approved, in my opinion.
And then just to follow up, if I may, so what if a student is deaf or hard of hearing and does not require an interpreter? Would they qualify for intensive needs funding?
Oh, that's through the chair. This is this district decision that is made at the school district level of whether they want to submit that student's paperwork for review for approval for intensive funding. And the state does not require districts to ask for that additional funding. Of course, most districts will do that automatically, but there's no guarantee that a school district will even ask for that funding. And if they do, based on the criteria written into the regulations and our practices, that student would qualify.
Last follow-up, if I may.
Please.
So of the 149 students that we have in the state who fall into the category of deaf or hard of hearing, is it possible for you to, I don't know, give us an estimate of the percentage of those individuals who do qualify for intensive needs funding?
I can provide, through the chair, I can provide this information at a later time, but I do not have that available to me right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and that would be wonderful if you can get it back to the committee, Representative Prox, and then we're going to, do you have a question? No. We're going to move into public testimony. Go ahead, Representative Prox, with your questions.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Enoch, has the department done any auditing or conducted any studies to get some sort of an estimate of how many children, if you will, might be falling through the cracks? That, for instance, there's some, I don't know, there's some expectation that the, and I'm not using the right term, but well baby checkups, newborn checkups, theoretically should catch a bunch. And then there's some that develop hearing problems later in life. Do we have any idea of how many people we might be missing at this time?
Through the chair, Senator Prox, this is something that's typically handled at the district level through the child find process and referrals. The students who fall through the cracks would be a school district issue that we don't have access to that information. If they don't identify that student as having a need, then we would have a problem getting account for those students, obviously. But the issue is making sure that the districts are aware of the procedures, the districts are aware of the child find requirements. We have not had a lot of problems with districts complying with child find correctly. There have been some over the last decade or so. There have been some districts who have had to have corrective actions made to their child find to make sure they're including all students who may have problems.
Follow up?
Follow up?
And have you received complaints or indications from parents that school districts might be aware of a need for services and are not, for whatever reason, providing those services under the current system, the way the system's operating now?
Through the chair, I'm assuming that we're talking about specifically related to deaf students. We do receive a number of complaints for parents not satisfied with the services they're receiving at the school district level. But to my knowledge, there have been none that are specific to deafness.
Well, okay, follow up.
Please.
In the general sense of parents complaining, what does the Department of Education do to follow up on those complaints?
In the event of, through the chair, in the event of a complaint, the district assigns a complaint investigator to that situation. It's investigated, the questions are formed, all parties are spoken to, statements of facts are verified, and after which a report is generated that the department scrutinizes at the special ed level, the administrative level, and the executive and administrative level if necessary, to make sure that our findings are correct, and typically a corrective action would be issued if the district is in default. Actually, if the district's in default, there will be a corrective action. It's just what that looks like may be different based on the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move into public testimony for HB 111 is now open. Is there anybody in the room wanting to testify? Is there anyone online wishing to testify? We're going to start off with Heather Batchelder. If you could please put your name on the record, your affiliation, and where you're calling from.
Hi, my name's Heather Batchelder, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Alaska Southeast. I prepare special educators to work with students who experience exceptionalities. I am speaking on my own behalf in support of HB 111. Before I testify, I would just like to clarify something. Under Part C of IDEA, there is Child Find and Early Intervention Services, and it provides support for families and children from birth to 3. Right before a child turns 3, what Mr. Enoch was referring to is an eligibility meeting to determine if the child would need services in special education pre-K. And then after that, once the child reached the kindergarten level through age 22, they would be served under Part B. So there is a bit of a safety net in there under IDEA to maybe catch some of those children because they can get services in early intervention before they have that meeting through Child Find with the school district. But I just wanted to say that children who are deaf and hard of hearing are born with the same ability to acquire language as any other children and deserve the same opportunities to do so. They have the capacity to be educated, graduate high school, obtain further education, and pursue a career. All families of deaf or hard of hearing children should have access to appropriate early intervention and family education services, comprehensive information, and access to state resources.
Thank you for your
Children
testimony.
who are deaf and hard of hearing should be able to acquire both English and American Sign Language simultaneously with the support of intervention services prior to entering school and reinforced within the school system. This exposure should be inclusive with peers to ensure that age-appropriate development of learning, emotional, and social needs are met and should provide access to adult role models who are deaf.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Alyssa Rose Miller. Please put your name on the record, your affiliation, and where you're calling from.
I apologize. My name is Alyssa Rose Miller. I'm with Stone Soup Group in Anchorage, and I am just here to listen and learn.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Next, we have Gina Bastian, Vocational Manager, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation with DOL. If you could please put your name on the record, your affiliation, and where you're calling from.
This is Gina Bastian. I work for the Department of Labor, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. I'm located in Anchorage, and I'm here to listen.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ryan Scott, our escort, with Department of Labor. If you're here to listen, that's fine, or if you were wanting to testify.
I'm here to listen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. Okay, that concludes our public testimony, but I am going to be leaving public testimony open for those who do want to send emails, and we may revisit online testimony. Are there any further questions from committee members? Go ahead. Are there any of those? Oh, they all jumped off. Okay.
Okay, someone, we mentioned IDEA program, which isn't the Galena School District, I don't think. What does IDEA stand for?
Representative Hemshoot, do you know what the acronym stands for?
I do. Through the chair, it's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
There we go. Representative Ruffridge?
Thank you, Chair Allard. Just a comment, I might just make a request that, I know we had set an amendment deadline for tomorrow for this bill. Perhaps we might consider extending that just a little bit since we had good dialogue today and just got the committee substitute yesterday.
I think we can do that, Representative Ruffridge. Let me get with my staffer and we can adjust the date.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then is there any other comments from any committee members? That'll give you guys, give us more time if there are any amendments that you wanted to bring forward, and we'll make that happen with the staff. Okay. Representative Prox, did you have a question? Or a
Well, I
comment?
guess just a comment. I would certainly like to check with the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District to get an idea of what's going on from their perspective. And, yeah, I think in general, we're rushing this. I'm not sure that we're trying to correct the problem, that we're starting at the right place to correct the problem. I think we need to hear more from perhaps the Department of Health, I guess, to find out. There seems to be a gap in the checking newborns and well baby checks that I thought were being conducted. But there seems to be some gaps. I'm not sure. Well, the other is that there was a comment that statute carries more weight than a law. Than a regulation. Well, technically, that's not true. The regulation has the same force of law. The question is whether the departments are getting the correct direction to develop their regulations. I'm concerned about setting anything in statute that might be unworkable. There might be a better way that hasn't been talked about. We just have very little information about this to be making a statutory change of this nature. So I would encourage that we go slower and deliberate for this bill.
Ms. Causer, do you have a comment? Or would you like to respond to that? Please, on our office's behalf. Statute versus administrative.
I would just echo what Mr. Seville said, that when it's in statute, it does hold a little bit more weight to the people who are reading it in the admin code.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions before we adjourn? Okay. That concludes our business for today. I will be setting HB 111 aside for Wednesday, 4/26/23. On Wednesday, the committee will be hearing HB 106, HB 105, and HB 111. I'd like to remind the committee that a deadline as to HB 111 has been set for Tuesday, April 25th. We've been requested that we revisit that, and that is what we will do. Are there any final comments from the committee? I am not on public record. I am not setting the amendment deadline for tomorrow at noon. We're going to look at extending that. Seeing no other business for the committee, we will adjourn. Let the record reflect that it is 10 a.m.